Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good to... Somebody says baby in the building and everybody goes crazy. Good to see everybody this morning. Go ahead and open up your Bibles to Exodus chapter 12. Exodus 12 is where we're going to be at. We're going to pick up where Adam left us off on Wednesday evening. What we're going to do this morning, I want to do something a little different. I want us just to, first off, just go through the text. Okay, we're going to pick up around verse 12. I want us to go through the text, read the text, see what's going on, and then we're going to go back about the last 10 minutes of class, and we're going to see a lot of foreshadowing that Adam was getting us into on Wednesday night about the Passover, the Lord's Supper, Christ himself, things like that, all right? So if you have comments about what the Passover signifies in the New Testament, hold on to them. We're going to get to them, I promise you. Let's just try to get through the text first, and then we'll go back to it. So the first thing I want us to look at is what's going on right now. Can somebody tell me, where are we at? They're getting ready to leave. How are they getting ready to leave? What has to happen first? Death. Death of the firstborn, right? God has told Moses this is what you're going to do, right? And what are they supposed to do? What are the children of Israel supposed to do to be saved? Yeah, what blood? Blood of a what? The firstborn lamb, right? Unblemished. And they are to take that blood, they are to put it on the doorpost and overhead, and then if you do that, right, then you partake of the meal. That was the Passover meal. And if you are doing these things, what's going to happen to your house? It'll get passed over, right? When the destroyer comes, it'll be passed over. A male lamb, yes, very important. And how are they supposed to be dressed while they're partaking of this meal? Ready to go, right? Staff in hand, shoes on, ready to go, okay? So that's going to bring us up here into verse 12 of chapter 12. So if somebody could look at verse 12 and read verses 12 through 20. Exodus 12, 12 through 20. Exodus 12, verses 12 through 20. All right, perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, so God gives the instructions for the Passover, and he gets ready to go into now instructions about the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. In verse 12 there, though, I want us to point something out. There's a reason I had to start there. Who is God executing judgment on in verse 12? Why is this last plague coming? Who is this judgment on? Speak up. I have a hard time hearing. I hear people mumbling. Against Egypt and their gods, right? Has God ever said this yet to Moses? This is who I'm executing judgment on? Adam's smiling because Adam knows the answer. No, he hasn't, right? But we've talked about this, right? God, when he says, I am executing judgment, this is why I'm doing these plagues. The reason why he's doing them is because what he's trying to do is he's showing what? He is better or stronger or more powerful than who? All the other, quote, gods of Egypt, right? And it even ends that, and Pharaoh, right, who is also a god of Egypt, right? And he even ends verse 12 saying, I am Yahweh, right? I am the Lord, that statement there. His whole reason why he's been doing these plagues isn't because, oh, I am just punishing Pharaoh and I want to do this. It's, I am trying to prove a point to my children. And who are his children? The nation of Israel, okay? Think about Israel at this time, okay? Who's their fathers? Who are their fathers? How'd they get down into Egypt? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, right? All these guys. They get down into Egypt. Do they have any actual like religious system set up? Do they have any way of worshiping Jehovah that we know of? No, they don't, right? In fact, they're not even going to get that until really this point onward are they now starting to get some laws and some rituals and things like that. What do they know, though, about Egypt's religious services? Probably a whole lot, right? You've been there for, roughly 400 years, right? You probably know everything about them and their gods and their religion. So what God is doing through these plagues is he's showing, I am stronger than these gods that you've been around for the last 400 plus years. Right? I am Yahweh. I am the one true God. And that's supposed to stick with them as they start to transition now into God's, quote, people. Yes, Doug. Yep, exactly, right? It's to not only show Israel and Egypt, right, but all the earth, the God of Israel. And then as you get into Joshua and stuff, right, years later, years down the road, people still remember these things. All right, so he does that, and then he goes ahead and he starts a new feast. What's that feast called? If you look up at the board. No, he already gave you the Passover. What's the next one he's setting up called? The Feast of the Unleavened Bread. Okay, so let's think about timing here. When was Passover supposed to start? When did you bring the lamb into the house? On the what day? The 10th day, right? You bring the lamb into the 10th day. When do you kill it? On the 14th day, okay? When does the Feast of the Unleavened Bread start? 14th into the 15th, right? The evening of the 14th into the 21st, right? So you keep it for how many days? 7 days. Somebody describe to me what the Feast of Unleavened Bread is. We just read all these instructions. What are you supposed to do? Yeah, you get all the leaven, right? Get it all out of your house. Get it all out of the land, right? Don't eat anything but unleavened bread. Are you allowed to work in these 7 days? Yeah, first day no, last day no, right? You can work to make the what? The lamb, the food, right? You're allowed to make whatever you can for food. What happens if you eat unleavened bread? You're cut off from the land of Israel. Who does that apply to? Every Israelite and every what? Sojourner. Anybody that is in the land of Israel during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So question, if you're a traveler, do you really want to be in the land of Israel during these 7 days? No, unless you like unleavened bread, right? But this also shows what to God, right? Let's try to apply this to our lives, okay? This is a neat feast that they're supposed to keep. What is God trying to point to Israel, though, at this time? Remember, this takes place on the evening of the Passover is when this starts, and it runs for the next week. What is God trying to show them? Yeah, one is, right, they're totally dependent on God. Okay, what else? Yeah, right, he says this is a memorial, okay, is to remember what God has done for you. And what is he currently doing for them, and what are they supposed to remember? Deliver them out of Egypt, deliver them out of bondage, okay? How does that apply to our lives? Think about leaven in the New Testament now. Sin, right? That's how leaven is described in the New Testament, right? It's sin. It's removing sin. Getting us out of bondage of what? To sin, right? Yeah, exactly. So what God is trying to do is he's trying to point to them, look, you are totally relying on me. And remember where you came from, right? This is a memorial of where you came from. We're going to talk about this, right, like I said, at the end of class. Okay, we're going to get into all this a little bit deeper. But that's the point of this whole service. For 7 days, remember who you are. Remember, get all the leaven, get everything worldly, spiritually, out of your house, and focus on me and focus on what I've done for you. Any thoughts on that? Yep. Yeah, exactly, right? And I think that's the reason why he says, even the sojourner, right? You're set apart. So even the people in the land, right, that are even with you during this time, they're not allowed to do it either, even if they are a Hebrew or not a Hebrew, right? No. No one is allowed to do this because you are set apart, and you are to remember that. Very good point. Any other thoughts? All right, let's keep going then. Somebody go ahead and read verses 21 through 28. All right, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so Moses and Aaron, they go and they give this instruction, right, to all the elders of Israel. And what are the elders of Israel supposed to do? How are they supposed to get the blood on the door? With their hands, with their fingers? What? Hyssop. What's hyssop? It's a sticky bush, right? Yeah, that's the best way to describe it. A bush, it's sticky. You're supposed to take all that, right, and then dip it into the blood, and then you paint one side of the door, the other side, and the top of the door. When are they supposed to do it? Gives them a time. In a week, tomorrow, next day. Yeah, right. He actually tells them, he says, for this evening, right, you are to do it. Okay, so it's happening that night, right? So is there some haste in getting these instructions out to God's people? Right? Do they just send an email chain? Hey, everybody. No, right? There has to be some haste in giving these things, right? They don't have telephones. You have to get this message out, and you have to get it out quickly, right? There's some urgency to this. Why do you think God would want some urgency from the children of Israel in this? Yeah, right. He wants to save Israel, right? He wants to punish the gods of Egypt. Let me ask you this. When God tells us to do something today, is there urgency in that? Or does he say, well, wait a week? Yeah, there's urgency, right? There's urgency in the commands of God. And what God is trying to do, again, remember, is he's not only trying to save Israel, trying to show them who he is, but he's trying to set up some attitudes in their hearts. And one of those attitudes and what he wants in their heart is, when I tell you something, have an urgency about it, right? Don't just sit and wait on things. When I tell you something, go out and do it. Question. He tells them when they get into the land, what are they supposed to do? Keep it permanently, right? And then he says, and when you do this, okay, you think your kids are going to have some questions? Probably, right? I mean, do your kids have questions when you do something every year? Right? Yeah, eventually your kids are going to start asking, like, why do we do this? You know, it's always fun because this happens to every parent. Your kid gets about like 3 or 4, and, you know, like the communion tray comes by, and they'll be like, what are you doing? And they never say it quietly, right? They do that kid whisper, you know, where they think they're being quiet, and then everybody can hear, what are you doing? And they have to explain to them, right, in the middle of communion, okay, this is what we're doing. The same thing here, right? God says, there's going to come a time when you're in the land and you're keeping this, your kids are going to ask you, what are we doing, right? And what's your answer? He even gives you the answer. What's the answer they're supposed to give? Yeah, it is a Passover sacrifice of the Lord, right, who passed over the children of Israel in Egypt, smote the Egyptians, and delivered our houses. Okay, so God's even telling him, look, this question is going to happen. This is what you're going to answer, right? This is a memorial, okay? Any other thoughts on this section of verses? Adam, you have any thoughts? You look like you're thinking over there deeply. Yep. It's an act of worship, yeah. Right. Kind of going back to your lesson again this morning, right? It's not, I just want you to do these things. It's, I want your heart in it. I want you to realize who I am and what I'm doing for you in this moment. And then years later, when you're telling your children can realize what I did for you and what I'm doing for your children currently. Very good point. All right, let's go ahead. Any other thoughts? Yes, Roger. Yeah, exactly, right? It wasn't just, hey, that's great, we're going to worship you, right? But we're going to worship you and we're going to do what you told us to do. Yes, very good point. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Let's look at verses 29 through 36. Let's actually read about this last plague, this last strife. Somebody read verses 29 through 36. Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay. Um, so it's the middle of the night. Somebody explain to me what happens in the middle of Hmm? Yeah, so Pharaoh calls them, right, in the middle of the night. Okay, well, before we get there, I'll answer your question. What's going on? Why would Pharaoh want to call Moses and Aaron in the middle of the night? Every household has death in it, right? It says from Pharaoh all the way to the guy in the dungeon, right? Even to the cattle, the firstborn everywhere is dying unless, right, you followed what God's instructions were. Now, to your question, right? God told them, or when Moses gave the instructions to the children of Israel, he said, everyone stay in your house until the morning, correct? Right? Well, then Pharaoh, in the middle of the night, it seems like, calls Moses and Aaron and says, right, hey, you guys need to talk to God, figure all this out. So the question is, I'll see if anybody else wants to answer first before I stick my foot in my mouth. How is it that Moses and Aaron were allowed to go out of their house in the middle of the night, even though God said don't come out of your house until morning? Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Yeah, Pharaoh summoned them. They were leaders, right? Right. Yeah, the reason why Pharaoh summons them is because they're the ones he's been dealing with this whole time, right? Him and the other elders of Israel have been witness to all this. I think it could be a couple reasons, right? I think one, right, we're not told, but God could have just told Moses and Aaron, hey, now's the time, right? Pharaoh's beaten. I'm going to allow you to go to him. Honestly, there's nothing else in the scripture that indicates why they were allowed out. We just know they used the instructions given, and that's what Moses and Aaron said. Adam, do you have any thoughts? Yeah, exactly, right. And, to your point, right, it's the judgment's already passed, it's passed over, because you can hear the wailing. And, right, it's so great that people are waking up in the middle of the night wondering what is going on. So judgment has already passed. And not only that, right, what do we know about Moses and his faithfulness right now? Do you think Moses is just going to go off and do whatever he wants to do at this point? No, right? He's going to know exactly what God wants him to do and then go ahead and do it. So what does Pharaoh tell them? Yes, Ron. Frustrated, yeah. Yeah, this is the final one. Right? Pharaoh knows I can't do this, right, for sure. And so what does he say in his frustration, in his anger, his sadness? What does he say? Go. Serve the Lord as you want, right? And bless me, right? And bless me also. I honestly never realized he said that until I started studying this again, right? It's go, get out, and please pray for me, right? Yeah, and the Egyptians wanted them out as soon as possible. Again, why did God have them dressed the way they were dressed, with their staff in hand and feet? Because he knew the minute Pharaoh breaks, it's go time, right? Again, it's get up, get going. So what kind of things do they take with them? What do the Egyptians give them? Everything they ask for, right? they have their unleavened bread, right? It mentions that. He says they have their unleavened bread. They wrap all that up in their cloaks. They get going, and then they start getting silver and gold and whatever it was they asked for. A couple things on that. Verse 35, right? It says, and the children of Israel did what? But they did according to what? To the words of Moses, right? Remember, Moses already gave them these instructions to do these things, right? And so now Israel's going through those instructions. Did God say this was going to happen? Yeah, where? He said it a few times already in Exodus. Does anybody remember a spot? Say it out loud, Jim. You got it.
Chapter 3, verse 22.
Chapter 3 and verse 22. Can you go ahead and read that for us?
But every woman shall ask of her neighbor, and the woman who lives in her house, articles of silver, and articles of gold, and clothing, and you will put them on your sons and daughters, lest you will plunder the Egyptians.
Yeah, right. Again, in chapter 3, chapter 3 and 4, we have the scene of the burning bush, right? When God is commissioning Moses to do this, he tells Moses, this is what's eventually going to happen. And now we see it, right, ways down the line now playing out, okay? Any other thoughts on these events before we move on? Mm. Yep.
This is the payment for all the services that the Israelites did.
Yeah, right. It's here you go. Right here's 400 years worth of back pay. You know, we gave you food, clothes. You're right, straw for a while until Pharaoh said no more straw, right? And now here it all is. Right, here's everything. Any other thoughts? All right. Yes, Rick. Yeah, exactly, right. When you're thinking, as an Israelite, right, why am I going to need all this gold and silver, right? We're going out into the wilderness as far as we know, right, up eventually into the promised land, but why do we need all this, right? God has a plan for all this stuff, right? Again, we have to realize, and we're going to look at this, is God isn't giving these instructions just to give these instructions because he thinks, oh, that's a good idea. I might eventually need this, or my people might eventually need this, right? No, there's a purpose behind all of it. And one of those purposes, like you mentioned, right, is eventually God's going to say, hey, build me a house of worship. You're going to need gold and silver to do this. Well, plunder the richest nation in the world at that time, and that might help you get somewhere. All right, somebody go ahead and read verses 37 through 51. Let's finish up the text and get into some interesting things. Awesome. Thank you very much, Sam. I appreciate that. Okay. How many people come out of the land of Egypt? 600,000 men. Right? Yeah. Besides the women, the children, right? Yeah, over the age of 20, 21, something like that, right? That's who's counted. 600,000 men over the age of 20, 21. Okay? Yeah, men who are able to go to war. If you notice in Sam's translation, right, it said the host of the armies or something like that, right? Or the divisions of the armies, right? And it was able-bodied fighting men is 600,000. Okay? Again, how many people roughly do we think left? You have 600,000 fighting men. Yeah, about 2 million, right? Anywhere between 1.5, 2 million, right? Some even say higher than 2 million, okay? Conservatively, about 2 million people. How long does it take to get 2 million people up and moving? How long does it take you to get 6 people to church? Right? Takes a little bit of time, yes, Derek.
Question about verse 38.
Yep.
A mixed multitude also. What does that mean?
What does it mean?
Is that only for livestock, or is that you got Egyptians that are living with it?
That's what it seems to indicate, right? You have a mixed multitude. You have people who are saying, right? Yes, Jim.
You got to remember the Egyptians was the number one nation in the world. And they were been fighting other people. And they captured people and brought them in to put with the Israelites as slaves. That other people, that got to be the people that they fought against in the past, and they took slaves in with them. And they were living amongst the Israelites.
It could be that as well, right? What I can tell you is there's a mixed people who aren't Israelites, right? Could be Egyptians, could be other nations that the Egyptians have conquered, right? What is it showing though? Why do you think, because that's a very good point, why do you think God would put that verse in the Bible for us to read that? Why didn't he just say 600,000 Israelites and their flocks? Why would he say, and a mixed multitude? Yeah, exactly, right? Again, God is showing us, right, this isn't just for my people, right? These are for the whole world to see. And if you remember, right, when the plague of the hail, what could they do to save their livestock? Bring in their animals, right? Moses tells them, this is coming. If you want to save your livestock, bring in your animals. And what do we then see in the next verse? Some of the Egyptians went ahead and did that, right? Some of the Egyptians, it only took them 6 plagues to figure out, oh, okay, we better start listening, right? So then when the 7th plague came, they brought some of their animals in. Exact same thing is probably happening here, right? People outside of Israel are seeing, all the firstborn just died, right? Whoever this God is, this Yahweh is, he's proven his point that he's more powerful than these gods of Egypt, right? So I'm going to go follow them wherever they go and whatever he wants me to do. But thank you for bringing that up, Derek. I appreciate that. So they bring, right, not only this mixed multitude, but they have flocks, herds. What else is with them again? Multitude of people. They're unleavened bread, right? Depending on your translation there in verse 39, I have I'm reading out of the King James. It says, they were thrust out of Egypt. What do your translations say? Does anybody else have a different word there? Driven out. What does that indicate? They want them out, and they want them out now.
I thought of this a long time ago. During the movie of Ten Commandments, it showed that some people did not want to do that, so their relatives or their friends did the literal code for them.
Yeah, right.
It wouldn't help because you had the leader of the household
Had to do it, yep. Yeah, very good point, right?
to do it for somebody else.
Yeah, exactly. Again, going back to that idea of worship and faith, right? Just because somebody, right, like in the Ten Commandments movie, you know, with Charlton Heston, which makes it the greatest movie ever, right? You see people running up to people's doors in the middle of the night and like putting, not like, no, that
Wouldn't work.
yeah, that doesn't work, right?
I was in the 3rd grade or something when that came out. And I remember they said, you can't do that to somebody.
Yep. Exactly, very good point. So God is kind of giving some final commands here to Moses and Aaron as they're leaving, okay? Again, reiterating the Passover, okay? He says this is an ordinance, you are to keep it. Who is allowed to eat the Passover? Those who are circumcised, right? Where do you get that from, Jim? What verse? 48 and 44, right? Is the stranger allowed to eat of the Passover? If he's circumcised, right? If he's part of the covenant, okay? He even tells them that, right? If you have a servant, if you have a slave, right? Once they're circumcised, once they're part of the covenant, then they can go ahead and eat of the Passover. Can anybody just partake of this meal? No. Right? Now compare that again, right, to the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. It's, if you're in the land, this is the only thing you're allowed to eat. Then the Passover is only if you're part of my covenant relationship are you allowed to eat of this meal. Any thoughts on that? Why would God say no strangers are allowed to eat of this? Yeah, exactly, right? It's, you want to partake of this, well, then you need to be in a covenant relationship with me, right? This isn't just a, hey, that meal looks good, I just want to do it because it's a cool thing to do. Yes, Ron? Yeah, right? You can't get into the ark with Noah, right? You can't just get the good stuff without wanting to follow me and to have that relationship. Very good point. Any other thoughts on these last verses before we kind of geek out a little bit on some things? Yes? Don't jump ahead of me. Yes, go ahead. Yeah, we'll get to that, yes. Yeah, let's wait. That's okay. Good eye, though, good eye. We're going to get there. We are definitely going to get there. And so how does chapter 12 end? How would you surmise up chapter 12, the end of chapter 12? They did as they were commanded, right? They are now free. Left according to their country, but they are out of Egyptian bondage. Yeah, right. They're not out of the whole country yet. All right, so we got 5 minutes. Yes, yes. Are you talking about like between God and Israel? It's the start of one. They have somewhat of a covenant relationship because of Abraham and the circumcision, right? They've all been circumcising their children up to this point. That's what God mentions in these verses, right? Unless you're circumcised, you can't eat of this. So there is a covenant relationship. Is there an actual like law built around like rituals and things like that? No, right? Other than the fact of what God has already just told them and what he's going to tell them later in Exodus. Again, remember, this is kind of like a transition. They're going from the Abraham covenant of circumcision that they've had for the last 400 plus years to an actual, like, what we call the old law, right? But very good question, yes. All right, so we won't go too deep into this because I want to actually give it time and let it breathe, so we'll go over it Wednesday night. Here are some verses I want you all to look at, okay, that we've read in Exodus 12. If you want to take a picture, write it down. One of them is no broken bones. Thank you, Roger. In Exodus 12 and verse 46. I want you to look at these verses and think about, and then come Wednesday night with your comments on how these foreshadow Christ and what we do today. Okay, we talked about this a little bit last Wednesday night with Adam. We're going to get in a little bit deeper. Look at some more things about Christ, about the Passover, about our covenant today, and our memorial that we take. Okay. Anybody have any questions in these last few minutes or comments about what we've read this morning in all of chapter 12? I'll leave that up there for a while if you can read it. Don't worry about it. So the first one, I'll read them real quick to you in case you're having trouble seeing, is the idea of an unblemished lamb, okay, in chapter 12, verses 3 and 6. The death of the lamb, verses 13 and 23. Hyssop, like we talked about in verse 22. No broken bones, in verse 46. The eating of the sacrifice, in verse 8. It being a memorial, okay, throughout the whole chapter. A physical delivery, right? God has physically delivered them out of bondage, okay? Think about that and how it applies to us. And then the idea that we talked about last Wednesday, right? Because Adam couldn't hold it in, this idea of the between the evenings, right? Remember we talked about that last Wednesday? We'll talk about that again a little bit next Wednesday. Okay, so look on this. You guys actually have homework after this class for the next few days. Look at it, compare it to the New Testament. See if you can see any correlations between the Passover feast, our own memorial that we're about to partake of, and Christ. Thank you all very much, and you're all dismissed.